Hello, I'm Cynthia Ng, and you're tuning in to Awani Review, a show where we speak to entrepreneurs making an impact in business and society. In this episode, joining me is PC Gun. She is the country manager of Homage Malaysia. Homage is a Singapore-based caregiving platform that provides on-demand healthcare services, and they also operate in Malaysia. It's great to have you here, PC, and thank you so much for making time to do this.
Thank you, Cynthia, for having me.
Now, Homage has done many wonderful things during the pandemic. We know that you're in the business of providing professional caregiving, mostly for senior citizens. But during this pandemic, I understand that Homage mobilized nurses to help administer over 500,000 COVID-19 vaccines. Talk to us about the initiative.
Yeah. So, Cynthia, a great point on caregiving. So that's how we actually started off in Malaysia, actually even in Singapore, which is providing home care to seniors. But what has then changed was that, of course, we've got unfortunately this pandemic. I think it's coming into 2 years now, and with 2 years in, we have gotten a lot of feedback, which is um, we are running out of nurses. So it was almost a nation's call to, gather all the nurses in Malaysia to help with vaccination. But I think given in the public hospital and also the private hospitals, everyone was, I suppose, trying their very best at their own capacity. But where we come in as Homage, because we are a platform where we have a lot of care professionals, from caregivers right up to nurses, right up to therapists. And that's where we have got close to 1,500 nurses and still counting. And so because of that, we are able to deploy all these nurses to various vaccination centers, and we are able to vaccinate, I think Malaysians right now, I think we are close to about 60-70% in Klang Valley already. So yeah, so that's how the business have a little bit changed in that sense, where we moved towards responding to the nation's call rather than just purely focus on home care and purely focus on senior care.
So we have seen quite a number of medical tech companies stepping up during the pandemic, like Homage supporting the wider COVID-19 battle. Now, how has Homage grown during this pandemic? I'm curious to know. What have you learned in the business? As more people are forced to embrace
Mm.
digitalization and subsequently digital healthcare as well.
So I think when we started in 2017, people were asking us, so you are home care, but they kind of confuse us with, so do you have actually a physical nursing home? But that's what we are trying to tell Malaysians, that a lot of our seniors, a lot of our loved ones prefer to age at home. Gracefully and even with dignity. So a lot of times we want to give these options back to Malaysians, which is, why send them to a nursing home, or even, if let's say somebody is unwell, why do you need to physically head to the hospitals when actually your home can be turned into a medical center? So I think fast forward to now, 2020, 2021, what we realize is that people are beginning to see that actually I can receive care at home. I can receive treatment at home. And that started off with, when we have got the rising cases, people then want to do their swabs. But instead of stepping out of their homes, going into clinics or going to hospitals to get swabs, people are then starting to look at, because by me stepping out of the house, I'm also exposing myself to the dangers of the virus. And whenever I'm outside, I may bring the virus back home. So that was when we decided to look at, you know what, in order for us to minimize these risks, why not we just start home swap? So it still comes back down to the core of our business, which is home care. Anything that can be done at the comfort of your home, why not?
All right. And have you seen an increase in business, in revenue throughout the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a bittersweet kind of response, I would say. I think it's great that the business is thriving, but it's also sad to see that we are getting a lot more responses. So, say for example, escort services. We do see, I think, in the past 6 months, just the past 6 months, the volume has increased by 10 times. So, this escort could be escort to hospitals, it could be escort to vaccination centers. So, the last time, when we have this service, people generally will go like, yeah, I probably don't need this. So that's the first business that has actually picked up on our end. And the other side of the business is that although a lot of us are working from home, most of them feel that now that I'm at home, I can take care of my parents better. So that was when we start to see the demand dropping a little bit. But then there was this thing called a caregiver burnt out. So a lot of all these, unfortunately, children comes back to us and said, PC, I don't think I can do this anymore because although I am in front of my computer, I'm at home, I still have this burnout because I just can't keep getting out of the computer, and my
Right.
working hours are somewhat longer. So that was when we saw the caregiving hours starting to pick up, especially in Klang Valley. And then, of course, we can see during this pandemic, some businesses are not doing quite well. So it becomes difficult to afford for this kind of services, especially people who have got chronic diseases. Going to clinics, going to hospitals are a little bit more difficult now because hospitals are not accepting them because they want them to do a COVID test first before they even admit themselves into the hospital. So I think there are a lot of barriers right now to seek treatment in hospitals.
Now, I want to pick up your point on accessibility and, more importantly, affordability, which I think is what makes Homage very unique because you are essentially trying to solve a really big problem as Malaysia moves toward becoming an aging nation. It's something that close to my heart because I have an aging parent. How do I work and take care of my parent at the same time? How will a service like Homage make caregiving easy and affordable for all?
Mm. I think before I answer that question, Cynthia, I will probably just take a step back and look at what are the options that's available in Malaysia.
Mhm.
So, say for example, if we have a loved one and if we are really lucky, they live healthy and they're able, so they can still grow old at home. But what if those who are unfortunately have got like certain medical condition where they would need to seek a live-in helper or even a nurse to help day in day out and then throughout round the clock, right? So if I were to take a look at the options that are available, unfortunately it's only nursing homes, but I think us being Asians, we try not to resort to that because it's not filial, right? So a lot of times we try to look at what is available and what can I do within my own home. But within your own home as well, as much as we provide the resources, there are also a lot of things I look at the homes. Is it conducive enough for an aging parent to be in there? So, say for example, certain homes with carpet example, it's easily folded, so it makes people trip over. So I think even if we were to house a senior, there are a lot of home modification we need to also do to make sure that it's a conducive environment for a senior citizen to grow old. So that part is really one, the conducive environment. But in the business that we are in, what we strive to do is to really lighten the burden of the children, like for yourself and myself. At the end of the day, if I take a look at just a very simple on a plane in itself, whenever there's any turbulence or whatsoever, the first thing that they say is take care of yourself first before you take care of the person right next to you. And it's the same thing in caregiving, right? We got to make sure that we are filled with the able body, the mental capacity to be able to care for a senior. So this is where we see, where mental health is a constant topic right now. That's where we want to carve out that space so that we can lighten the burdens of you and I, people who are in the sandwich generation, to make sure that the burden is not entirely on you.
That is on a personal level burden for the children. And on the other hand, an aging population will also increase the strain on a couple of things, right? The pension system, the healthcare system. Speaking about burnt out, our nurses, our doctors have been working endlessly, tirelessly throughout the pandemic. I'm just curious to know, I mean, your thoughts about how startups like Homage and also technology, how can it help breach or maybe fix some of those gaps in our existing healthcare system,
Mm,
particularly pertaining to senior living or aged care?
mm, mm. So I think I'll probably start off with how Homage we take care of three stakeholders. So the first stakeholder that I talked about earlier on was about the children themselves, like you and I. But now moving into the care professional front, right, which is the nurses, the caregivers, and also the doctors. So I think we mentioned about how this is quite a troubling time, especially in the travel industry. So, what has happened as part of our caregiving services, especially during this vaccination time, was that a lot of people in the airline industry, when they are being let go of, they tend to look at, okay, so what other service industries are there that I can contribute? So that was when we started seeing a lot of airline air hostess, air stewardesses coming onto our platform. And when we looked into their contribution and we thought like, hey, you know what? Maybe we can actually get you on board, work with us in terms of vaccination. So I think that was when we worked really closely with a lot of airlines company to make sure that we do a proper ushering when we go for vaccination. So that's the one stakeholder that we're doing. And then the second part are the nurses. So nurses before the pandemic, it's very unfortunate that they have not been valued much. So I give you an example. Somebody with 15 over years experience, they can be gaining about 3,000, 4,000 ringgit um, monthly, and they have to work double shifts. And what this means, it's almost a 12 hours, and on top of all the household work that they are doing. But it's because we have got this pandemic, this vaccination, and everyone is asking for nurses. That was when the supply is low and demand is high up. That was when they started commanding a lot more pay. How will this pan out after this pandemic?
Mhm.
How will this pan out 2 years from now? I'm not sure, but I really do hope that this is a time that it opens our eyes to see that, the frontliners are really not just the doctors or the nurses. Even the people who are working at the lab, who is constantly churning up the lab results for the swab, they are also working around the clock. So I think with this pandemic, it really opens up our eyes as to who really are the frontliners, who are the ones who are working towards controlling this pandemic. That's one. And then in terms of senior living, right now what we're seeing is that a lot of nursing homes are also trying to control the intakes, because for every new senior that's coming home, potentially this person could be carrying the virus. So then that's that barrier for seniors to go into nursing homes. And then for seniors who have got chronic illness, who needs that follow-up checkup, a lot of hospitals are also putting a hold on treating them and following up with the progress. And that's when you take a look at what other options are there really for these seniors? So I guess that's why the birth of teleconsultation or telemedicine is so important during this time. It also accelerates the learning. And what I realize now is that I don't even need to educate Malaysians anymore on what is teleconsultation all about, because we're so used to using video now.
Mhm. Is Malaysia ready to deal with an aging population and the challenges that come with it?
So if I were to take a look at Homage in Singapore, because I always like to look at what are our neighboring countries doing, so at least then we can learn better. So if I were to take a look at last year's budget allocation, I think they allocated about 7.3, no, sorry, I think about 4.5 billion, but they've upped that into 12 billion right now. But it's only last year in Malaysia, we've only increased it to 4.5 billion. So, and then if I take a look at the country, the size of the country and the population, where Singapore is at 12 billion and we are at 4.3. I think the government subsidy in itself is potentially not even enough. That's one. The second thing is, if I were to take a look at how we operate, a lot of times, especially during this time, what I realized that our business grows a lot faster in states or in towns where amenities are not near. Because for them to travel to the nearest clinic kesihatan or even to the nearest hospital, it takes them about 2 hours drive. So, what more if a senior who is disabled, or who is, and how then do we provide them with this sort of care? So I guess that's where we come in a lot, so that we can be that bridge, so you don't need to travel that 2 hours, because we can come to you. And with technology, like ourselves, we have got this smart matching. It's almost like a concept of an e-hailing app, where if you, let's say for example, here we are in KL, but if your loved ones is in Ipoh, for example, I'm able to get help instantly from the app for my loved ones in Ipoh, because my app in itself will be able to find the nearest skilled care worker and send them over to the loved one in Ipoh. So I think that's where we come in as tech, because you don't need to physically be transport a person over to another unit.
As you rightly pointed out, I can only see the growth in this segment, medical tech, health tech, especially with a rapidly aging population. You mentioned Singapore, and I think Japan is another country that has done well in laying down policies that will spur creation of medical tech and aged care industries, with state funding and whatnot. So, I mean, for Malaysia, then, what are your hopes? We have a new health minister. We have perhaps better ideas that we can contribute to making things better overall.
I think there are two portions to this. I mean, just purely looking at the way we executed vaccination, I think it's great at the heart of where Malaysia is, which is Kuala Lumpur, because it was the fastest ever, right? And I think what I would like to see a little bit more is really the public-private partnership. And I think this part here, people still look at private hospitals or in a private setting. But what I think I would like to put our attention to is really in terms of tech, right? What else can we do from the tech perspective? Because in terms of a platform that has got 1,500 to 2,000 over nurses Malaysia wide, how can you use these resources or this platform to help you mobilize, right? Whether if it's vaccination. Right now, how we are looking at it is that when we have mega PPVs, we Malaysians go to the center. But what happens to those people who are living further out? And that's where I look at Homage as a mobile hospital in that sense, because I can then go to Malaysians who are on wheelchair bound, example, or go to seniors who are unable to get up from the bed. So it's the mobile piece and also the tech piece. And then if I were to take a look at also the subsidy and the things that is being allocated out in terms of budget, a lot of things still requires Malaysians to head to a clinic or to head to a place to get treatment, but nothing covers the home piece, right? Because I think that's the part where we need to start looking at how everyone is doing things at home. How is this going to pan out in the next 2 years? I'm not sure, but I think even till end of this year until next year, we are still going to be homebound for a while.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of that, I'd like to understand a bit more about Homage's expansion plans. You currently operate in Singapore, Malaysia, and also Australia.
Mm.
And Homage recently closed its Series C financing, $30 million. Congratulations on that. What's interesting is among the key investors, which I find quite interesting, is Daiwa Ventures, which is a Japanese venture capital fund that focuses on blockchain, artificial intelligence, and biohealth. So I'm wondering if we are going to expect Homage to introduce perhaps new verticals that are driven by artificial intelligence, blockchain, and the likes.
I think for us, with this investment that's coming in, usually there are a few things that we look at. I think the first one in itself is market expansion. As you have pointed out, yes, potentially we will be moving over to Japan and also another market soon. But what we want to cover is really Southeast Asia and Oceania. But zooming into Malaysia in itself, I think we are still at the phase where people need to understand what home care is all about. It's really breaking that habit of being having to get care means I have to step out from my home. So I think for Malaysia, we are still at that phase. Not so maybe in Kuala Lumpur, but if we were to take a look at East Coast example, or even at Kedah, Sabah, Sarawak. So we are looking at a much bigger estate that we are covering for Malaysia. So I think specifically for Malaysia, it's really covering everyone and anyone. And for us, it's really tapping into and working very closely with the government to see, is there any way possible to cover for the B40s? Because it's the B40s that truly need this, right? And they are the ones who are required to travel the 2-3 hours just to get help. And then now zooming out to Homage as a group. In tech-wise, yes. So I think there are a lot of basic that we still want to fix, which is focusing on our core business, caregiving at home. What we then move on to, which is already happening in Singapore, is really the telemedicine, the delivering of medication, teleconsulting, everything at home. But what goes beyond that is, I guess that's where we look at our partners, what's happening in Japan, what's also happening in Australia. So I think for us, we also still want to look at the fundamentals, where in Australia, there is a lot of care managers where they actually plan for seniors to grow old, whether if it's palliative care right up to grave, right? So that entire portion is being planned out financially and also being able to do that at home. I think that's the fundamental that we're trying to fix right now before we even try to get ahead of ourselves and putting in way too much tech where people may not be ready to accept.
And what are some of the challenges do Homage face when trying to expand in Malaysia?
I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing, but a lot of times people feel that if a loved one needs help, there needs to be a family members that need to sacrifice, whether if it's their career, their chance to earn, or to have to do
But it
something. But
doesn't have to be that way if there is support.
exactly, but it's
Right.
it's still happening. It's still happening. We still see people like or having to give up their jobs because you have to take care of your parents.
All right. Now, thank you so much giving us an insight into Homage and your operations in Malaysia. In this final few minutes, I would actually like to speak more about you. I understand that you've had more than 15 years experience in tech startup, from starting at ground zero to managing hundreds of employees across different business operations. What are some of the key lessons, growing a startup, especially medical tech? Health tech, medical health tech, and in Malaysia particularly, this is still a somewhat new area compared to say fintech, which I know you have an experience, a wealth of experience in. So walk us through some of the lessons that you have learned and some of the strategies.
Mm-mm. So I think what I love about startups is that you instantly see results or gratification, right? Whether people accept or love you or hate you, right? I think in the fintech industry, I think maybe if I were to just take a look at 2 years ago, maybe a lot of people still prefer cash, right? Just holding on to it. A lot of times we are only scratching the surface, where people who are using smartphones, example, a lot of times we think that, yeah, smartphones, everyone use them, right? So getting them to make a booking and or even just getting food delivered should be quite easy. But you'll be quite surprised that not many Malaysians get it. So smartphone in itself, some people just use it for just pure WhatsApp. Simple thing, if I just take a look at payment methods, I think if I look at 2 years back also, a lot of people still prefer bank transfers. People still prefer to use something that they can see, credit card, right? But now, if I take a look at Homage, people still prefer bank transfers. So what happened to all the different options like e-wallet and even credit card? So I think for us Malaysian here, there's a lot of things where we introduce, but it's only to a certain population. So it does not quite um, how to say, garner the appetite of the rest of the Malaysian. And I think that's the struggle that I have with tech or any startup. It's because we will only be looking at addressing certain markets and certain targeted audience, because not many people have the appetite. And for Malaysia, we do have got a lot of other people outside of the urban area. How well are they accepting this? This portion here would definitely sort of like triggers investors' point of view, which is, if we are only at the surface or tip of the iceberg, how much more do I need to invest in order for Malaysia to grow? So I think from a tech perspective, investors generally will look at the uptake versus the population. That's one. And then, of course, given that med and even fintech, it's a regulated industry, a regulated world, a lot of times it's also dependent on how fast or yeah, how fast the government wants to move. And it has to be tech enabled, and it starts off with the leadership in the parliament.